G'day, g'day. Welcome back to Collectivitis, the podcast where we dissect the disease that is collectivism. My name's Pietro. This is Max. What are you giggling at, Max? You're giggling before we've even started.
Oh, I don't know, Pietro. Just having fun. Let's start this again. I don't know why I'm
It's good.
laughing so
Leave it
much.
in. Leave it in. You're
We're
having
going.
fun.
All right, we're having
We're
fun.
going. You're having fun. That's part of this.
Got to have fun once in a while, Pietro.
How are you, Max?
I'm all right. Other than what our viewers can see who are watching on YouTube and not just listening on Spotify.
Why don't you describe what our viewers might be able to see?
Yeah, visual description. You were witnessing a crazy man who's just been fighting government. I was in Parliament and I got in a fight with Anthony Albanese and Peter Dutton and Adam Band. I was punching him and I managed to break my wrist. So if you're watching, you are viewing a man wearing a cast on his wrist.
Yeah, you're a bit of a magnet for injuries lately, aren't you?
Yeah, just fighting for liberty too hard.
Did you at least get some good hits in on elbow and who'd you fight? Dutton, elbow, and Band.
I just got stuck on Bant, just left, right.
Is he the one that hurt you?
No. I've been playing football, Pietro. So and I'm a magnet for injuries. So I've managed to do myself a good one. But it's good because it is a beer holder.
Great news. Yeah, you're making me want to break my arm already. You make it look so good. Cool. Well, it is just us, as you can probably tell from the excessive banter at the start of this episode. We don't have a guest who's just waiting on the sidelines thinking, fucking shut the fuck up. We are just the two of us today. We haven't done a solo one in a while, which means that we've got lots to talk about. And I suppose a few of the things that we're going to talk about are not super recent, but we haven't talked about them, and there's still interesting stuff to say about them. So I feel like it's a good chance to sort of catch up on everything that's on the backlog, and then hopefully we'll do some more solo episodes soon, and we can talk about more imminently pressing things. But the first thing that we want to talk about is, as I said, a couple of weeks old, the Commonwealth Games. So I'm sure anyone who wasn't living under a rock, at least here in Victoria, knows that the Commonwealth Games have been cancelled. Dan Andrews has said, no Commonwealth Games. We can't afford it, which is an oddly fiscally responsible thing for Andrews to say. So before we talk any more about it, let's see what he has to say specifically on this issue.
Our consultations with industry, all of our pre-tender work tells us $6 to $7 billion is well and truly too much for a 12-day sporting event. I will not take money out of hospitals and schools in order to fund an event that is 3 times the cost as estimated and budgeted for last year. In terms of where we go to from here, the Games will not proceed in Victoria in 2026. We have informed Commonwealth Games authorities of our decision to seek to terminate the contract and to not host the Games. Meetings occurred, amicable and productive meetings occurred in London last night, and they will again continue London time later on today.
All right, that's enough from our venerated premier.
Okay, first note.
Yep.
It says $6 to $12 billion is too much to spend on an event which runs for 12 days. Sorry, but $380 million to rip up a contract for something that's not going to happen isn't too much money, Daniel?
Yeah, so $6 to $7 billion when the estimated had been something like $2 to $3 billion.
So who's in charge of like forecasting those figures? Like, why are they not being hung out to dry? I mean, I know why they're not going to be hung out to dry, but like that's one of the issues there.
I think from what I can tell, the 2 to 3 billion was what the Commonwealth Games like organization had said the preliminary estimates were going to be, and then like when Andrew started looking into what it would end up costing overall things, he came up with these figures. Like these figures are they're all up in the air. In fact, in that interview, he goes on to say that the 6 to 7 billion is what they'd heard, but he thought it probably was going to be much more than that. Now,
I'm going by his track record. If he's actually being like, I don't want to use the word honest, but if he's being quite modest about a bit of a budget blowout, it's probably going to be 20 times more than that, going by his track record. And the Commonwealth Games won't be happening in 2026; they'll be happening in 2036.
Yeah. So that was one of the points that I was going to make, is that Andrews would have loved to spend a whole bunch of money on infrastructure. In fact, even though the Commonwealth Games aren't going ahead, he has, as a kind of like remedial measure, promised $2 billion to be spent on regional facility upgrades of all sorts, like money spent regionally, $2 billion, because we're not getting the $2 billion from the Commonwealth Games. So there certainly is an amount of money that Andrews would love to just spend, because, he is a slave in many ways to the unions. The unions are the backbone of the Labor Party, especially the socialist faction of the Labor Party here in Victoria, of which he is the leader. And so if he loses the support of the unions, he loses the support of every single backing that he has. And so he loves to throw construction spending and infrastructure spending. And that's why Victoria's always in some sort of big build. There's always some enormous blowout budget project going. And so obviously the spending of the $2 billion regionally is still, that's an amount of money that he clearly was willing to spend. What kind of stands out to me is that for him to not go ahead and spend the 6-7 billion, whatever it would have ended up being, then the internal economic forecasters that they have that are honest with them and say, okay, this is the amount of money that we can steal from civilians, and this is the amount of money that would throw us into a full-blown recession and lose us the next election, they must be forecasting a really dire situation for him to pull out of this, because Andrews, a budget blowout is his bread and butter. And it's, the left's mechanism is their bread and butter, to blow out a budget by an insane amount. So the fact that he is pulling out of the Commonwealth Games and doing what is on face value an economically responsible thing means that the situation must be dire. That was my first thought. And you're right. The what did they say? $380 million penalty that it's going to cost us to pull out of the games. If it were even close to like us being able to make that $7 billion figure work, it would have been worth it for them. So we must be nowhere near, and it must be like that would be a nail in the coffin, is my interpretation of these events.
And that 380 mil was just the money, I believe, that we had to pay to the Commonwealth Games themselves to rip up the contract, let alone the amount of money we would have spent on people already hired in positions to plan and committees. I would hate to see how much more money there is there. It's just been, we know the Labor government loves having a huge public sector, so the more jobs, the merrier, which mean nothing for them. But I would hate to see how much money has been spent on wages for nothing.
Yeah, and yeah, you're right. The 380 million is literally just a fine. It's a fine for having pulled out of the games. But and so look, it's on face value, like, yes, this whatever is going on shows something deeper that's happening, and it is on face value an economically responsible thing to do. And I don't actually want to take, you can take it if you want, but I wouldn't. I think it's. I don't like particularly the angle that the Liberal Party have taken in response to this, which is, look how economically irresponsible Labor have been, and this is now a national embarrassment that we can't host the games, or this, that, and the other. Like, honestly, the give credit where credit is due. Like, clearly, this must be such a bad situation that we have to pull out of the games. Like, clearly, the state's economy must be, the government's finances must be horrific for them not to be able to extend the debt of the state by this amount to be able to host these games, because we're like, the state's already in an enormous amount of debt. I think Victoria is
it's a drop in the ocean.
It's in hundreds of billions of dollars of debt. So like, it should be a drop in the ocean, which means that if they are concerned about this, like, wow, things must be getting pretty close to where they think the upper limit is.
Tell you what angle not enough people are taking, in my opinion. is, I mean, I know election promises are broken all the time, but this is a major election promise. This was like one of the things they run on, which was we actually care about, regional areas because, they've been criticized quite often about, Daniel Andrews and Labor government only look after Melbourne. So they've come out and said, we're going to pump a fuckload of money into regional areas with these regional based Commonwealth Games. I wonder how many votes they won purely on that. And now that's not going to happen. This is probably one of the reasons why we need recall elections.
Yeah, well, and that was another point that I think you've touched on, that is, you're right, probably not enough people are making, but I suppose there would be some people within the Liberal Party that are making that point. He won the election.
That should be their major point that they're attacking him on, not coming out and saying what an embarrassment, we should have kept the games and just spent the money or whatever, like they're going at.
Yeah. I think the libertarian insight on all of this, I think, is something slightly different. I think is so let's take a big step back and look at, okay, what is the state? The state, our libertarian insight teaches us, is this kind of organism that exists and has its own life and exists parasitically towards society. It latches on like a leech, and it sucks as much wealth from the population as it can, and at the same time it also governs them. So a leech is parasitic purely, it's just kind of there, whereas the state rather, literally controls an area and slowly siphons wealth out, like this great disgusting beast that slowly grows and grows and grows, and it concerns itself with sucking the wealth out in various ways, either directly through taxation or through going into debt and therefore printing extra money, and therefore through inflation taking the value from people, and focuses on monopolizing certain areas of the economy. So the state is this thing. It's this disgusting organism that uses its power to take control over an entire area of land and the people and the wealth and everything. Politicians are not the state. Dan Andrews is not part and parcel with the state. People can't be part of this organism on a total level. There's now, certainly the higher up you are as a politician and the more powerful you are, you're probably quite conscious of what the state is and what it does. But politicians are merely a useful tool for the state. They're people that are put into positions where the incentives that they respond to are exactly what helps the state. So Dan Andrews put into a position of power, the incentives that make him more powerful and make him richer and make him have influence among different circles are to extract wealth and to grow the public sector and to give money to the corporations that he agrees with and to take money away from the areas where he doesn't agree with. And so he is just a person responding to the incentives of whichever situation he is in. Now, typically, a politician will try to extract as much wealth as they can for themselves and for their friends, as much of this, they'll suck as much juice as they can out of society, before eventually getting tossed out, and some other politician gets thrown in, because society will wake up enough to be like, hold on, we are getting absolutely railroaded here. That guy's a piece of shit. But then the state's solution is, hey, yeah, this guy's a piece of shit. Look at this other guy. This other guy will save you, and then people vote for the other guy. Typically, now some dictatorships, especially the more authoritarian ones, these politicians can stay in power for decades. You can see with Putin's been in power forever. Typically in the West, because elections tend to be more frequent and more free in a sense, the dictators the people in the position of power, there's about a 10 to 15 year maximum term before society eventually has become so annoyed with them that they want to get rid of them regardless. They think that they're getting railroaded, so they pick a different solution. We saw this with Howard. Howard was incredibly popular for a fairly long time. Eventually, just enough people over enough time got sick of him and lost in a landslide in the end. Just
to interject for a second, or to agree with you more so, I remember when Howard got voted out, I would have been we both would have been the same age, at 12 or 13, yeah, possibly. And a lot of the people, friends' parents I heard that were against him. I'm not going to comment on whether Howard was a good PM or not. But they necessarily weren't saying he was doing a bad job. They just said it's time for change. And like you were saying, like that you reach that 15-year max, whatever it is around that, and good luck getting voted back in, even if you've done a good job.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of how the West works. And that's kind of the end of your cycle. And in the US, literally the presidents are only allowed 2 terms. So the incentives for these people, for these politicians, such as and Howard in different ways, but also Howard, like the only reason that Australia wasn't in debt under Howard was not because of his particularly fiscal responsibility. It was because we were exporting so many minerals, and Rudd managed to get us in debt after that anyway, despite our absolute rich resources. But regardless, so what I suspect is that Dan, now this is me speculating. And I could be wrong. And if I'm right, then I'll be really impressive to our 3.5 viewers. And if I'm wrong, then barely anyone will know. So it's fantastic. But let me throw a speculation out there. Let me throw a prediction. I think that Dan Andrews is probably towards the end of his cycle, and I think he knows it. I think that promising the Commonwealth Games at the election was a calculated risk. I don't know whether he knew that he couldn't deliver it at the time. He probably already did. I think that he is he's aware that he's nearing the end of his cycle, and therefore he's either and I don't know if you've noticed, but recently in the last sort of couple of months there's been heaps of talk of Dan Andrews stepping down. Now he has siphoned all the wealth, the prestige, the connections, the friends in high places that he possibly could from his position. Like, Dan Andrews will have no problems over the course of the rest of his life. He is going to be just fine whether he wins this election or not. And the decision on, so he's essentially picking now whether does he resign and, save face for the Labor Party to some extent and, say, hey, I resigned on my own terms. These were my decisions, probably because of the fact that Victoria is coming towards a point where the inflation and the debt will make the next election untenable for either him or the Labor Party. So he'll either resign or he'll write it out. And he'll see if he wins the next one. And especially if his internal polling suggests that somehow he happens to still be popular enough, he might win the next one and he'll write it out. Because that's the other thing, is that we actually, despite whether the economy is in a good or a bad place, or whether the government's finances are in a place where they can still hold out, the average person, how they're going to vote is not entirely predictable. Like, sometimes he may just continue to get elected for another cycle, or I would be extremely surprised if it's 2, but he may win the next one.
Yeah, must be tough for him though, because he's got such a giant ego. So he could win one more election and that ego would just inflate bigger than you could ever imagine, or he could resign and keep his legacy.
That's right. And I'd say ego is probably the only thing governing his decision at this point, is whether if he thinks he can win the next one, he'll write it out and try to get another ego boost, or if he doesn't think so, he'll resign. But either way, I think he is well aware that his cycle is coming to an end. Not in the satisfying way that maybe some of us would have liked to see it come to an end, but I think he knows. Either way, the stakes for Daniel Andrews are extremely low. He is going to be just fine regardless of this. He is going to be A-okay, but I think at his role as a servant of the state, his role as a pawn for this organism that is suctioning and feeding, is coming to an end. So that's my speculation. Now, whether this comes true or not, we'll probably know within the next. I mean, if he doesn't resign soon, we'll know at the next election whether he wins it or not. But I suspect that Andrews is, and this is a sign of that. The fact that he's willing to pull out of this shows that maybe he's trying to save some face rather than go down while he's still at the helm.
Yeah, good point. Great description on what the state is as well. My description is it's a state of despair.
It's a state of despair. That's good. Yours is more poetic. Mine's a much more visceral metaphor. Cool. Well, that's what I had to say, or we had to say rather, about the Commonwealth Games. Again, that is old news, but in more recent news, and this one is, so that's the depressing aspect of it, is which essentially our economy is in an extremely dire situation, so dire that Dan Andrews has started being fiscally responsible. That's a pretty somber note to start the podcast with. But on a much more positive note, if our economy gets bad enough, such as it has in Argentina, then wonderful things can start happening when people become desperate enough to look away from their beloved state. Now, have you, in fact, and I want to give you credit for this, you were the one who actually alerted me to Javier Milei a few months ago.
I've got to say, I don't know who brought it to my attention or how it came to my attention in the first place, but I was about a month ahead of the curveball.
Yeah, no, you really were, and even like I hadn't heard anywhere other people in sort of my circles of the libertarian movement talk about him, and you were like, this guy, hey, is this libertarian, and he might be winning in Argentina, and I was like, okay, yeah, those weirdos in Argentina, they do weird stuff, but it turns out that you were prophetic in this.
Pietro, one of our first episodes, we were talking about how libertarians always lose.
Yeah.
It's time to break that fucking cycle.
Well, yeah, I don't want to get too excited too soon, because so what's actually happened is Argentina had an election, and it's not the general election. It's a primary.
It works over 2 rounds. There's the primary election and the secondary election, or general election actually follows the primary election. So the primary election, I think it's between 3. It appeared to be between 3 candidates or 3 parties, and he won that vote like 31 or 32%. And I think the next was the incumbent with like maybe 27% or something like that. Hopefully my math stacks up.
Yeah. So from what I understand, it was the sort of 3 had almost identical scores, and he came out on top. So he was like 30 something, then there was like maybe low 30s, and there was like 20s or something. So not nearly identical, but quite close to each other. And the 3 biggest contenders are so Javier Milei, who is a libertarian, unabashedly loud, insulting to the other candidates, libertarian. And then there is the 2 major parties, which is just like center right, and one which is like center left, or I don't know. It's South America. Their center left is probably like Che Guevara. So his messaging has been not only spot on from a correct libertarian point of view. He's been railing on the central banks there. He's been talking about dollarization, which is accepting dollars, US dollars, as part of their legal tender rather than their currency, because their currency is at record high inflations, where it's like 120% in the last year or something. So like ridiculous, like dropping in value quicker than you can buy things, which is obviously completely destabilizing for a country and for an economy. And so he's advocating for dollarization, which I think is kind of like a midway step, or a poor man's version of going to the gold standard, because maybe going to the gold standard, I don't know, is not as easy to sell, whereas dollarization would be much easier to do.
A lot of these places anyway, they already operate in like US dollars, but just like on the black market or bootleg, like you can pay in local currency or you can pay in US dollars, and it's a bit safer. I've done some backpacking around some very undeveloped countries, and not to say Argentina is undeveloped. A lot of it is, but everywhere except US dollars, because it is so much more stable than their shit currencies.
Yeah. Well, and so, I guess he's looking to formalize this. He's railing against, and he talks about how, like, he talks about like the leftists are pieces of shit, and like that's literally the words he's using. And he has animated a whole enormous number of people. And I just wanted to read you a quote from him, which kind of gives you an idea of like the tone of his messaging. And this is probably one of the problem is we can't play a clip from him because unfortunately he speaks Spanish and all his clips are in Spanish, which is really annoying. And I'd rather not play a dubbed clip, but I will read you a quote of his, which is translated to English, just to give you an idea of like the tone of his messaging. And this is one of the more like toned down of his exchanges. So he says, "We libertarians are decent people and we don't advocate for envy, hatred, theft, or unequal treatment under the law. The abomination of social justice is the most unjust thing that exists because it means stealing the fruits of someone's labor and giving them to others just because I feel like it. And in that whole process, not only did they destroy the economy, they impoverished people. From 1970 to now, the size of the state tripled and the number of poor people multiplied by 6. And you know who are the only ones who really prospered? The politicians. So you know what? If you want to stay in this country, you have to identify the enemy. The enemy is the politicians." Which, like, that's
Fuck
pretty
yeah.
cool. I mean,
We always talk about being radical and being bold, and if you're gonna be a libertarian, fucking tell people about it and push your message as hard as you can, and don't be scared to piss people off because, hey,
absolutely, and this is a huge turning point. So he hasn't won the election yet, which is kind of the point. There's another round, but this round,
I'll tell you what, he better bloody win it now after all this pumping up we're doing.
That's what I'm saying. Like, we're all getting very excited, and it would suck if he didn't win it now. And I mean, even if he does win it, I don't think that their president, I think it's president, has so much power over like the House and the Senate or whatever their equivalents are that they can change everything. But he would certainly be, a signal that there is huge potential for change, at least in Argentina. And obviously, it's a clear sign that he is doing something right, because as soon as he shock won this round of elections, immediately all the media and all the newspapers started labeling him far right, extremist, populist, Trump supporting psychopath madman.
What was the best one though? It was something like tantric sex expert.
Yeah. Tantric sex expert. I
Cool.
saw that one too.
Extra votes for him.
Well, I'm just gonna vote for him even harder now. What do you mean?
Yeah, it's typical of the mainstream media to jump on that before like the correct message starts seeping out, which is libertarian, like wins election or like he's winning election. And what it means, it's like, no, let's fucking like just push this down as far as we can, as soon as we can, and just call him a fucking far right extremist Trump supporter.
Yeah, which is so dishonest, because like what do they think is the far right? Like the far right by their definition is like
anything a centimeter right of far left is extreme right extremist.
Yeah. So like the only way you could describe him as being far right is in the way that he is absolutely railing against like socialism and social justice. Like if that's the scale that you use, yes, he is the opposite of socialism.
Good.
But by their metrics, by the metrics of how the mainstream media talk about left and right, he's not far right. Far right is like how they talk about it is like fascism. You couldn't be further from fascism if you're trying to destabilize like power, like decentralize power away from central banks and governments and give it to individuals. Like that is the polar opposite of fascism, and like remove power from corporations and remove monopolies created by the government, which is exactly what he's trying to do. And he's talking about how the biggest evils in the world are the central banks. And the big problem is that unfortunately, if he keeps winning and if the media attacks don't do enough to destabilize him, this is South America. I reckon there's a decent chance that that this guy gets assassinated. I saw the I think it was the night before the election where he had like a speech or a rally or a party thing in a stadium, like a literal stadium, where there were tens of thousands, if not, I don't even know, if it might have even been 100,000, like screaming fans, like he was a rock star. And like he's a very animated and excited, and he's a character if you
And
see
looks
him.
like a rock star too. Let's be
Yeah,
honest.
and he looks like a rockstar. He's got these huge sideburns. He's a bizarre
Straight out of the 70s.
character. And he's up there like sort of, rocking out to these people and screaming about liberty and whatnot. And I was just thinking, I had two thoughts simultaneously immediately in my head, because I'd seen him on talk shows and on news shows say really bold things, but I'd never seen this energy, this electrifying energy that he clearly inspires people with.
Was
And I had
the
two
first thought
simultaneous thoughts. Yeah,
was the
sorry,
first thought I should Google flights to Argentina?
Yeah, sorry, I had three simultaneous thoughts. One was I should Google flights to Argentina. No. The two simultaneous thoughts I had was, one, South America goes hard. South America goes hard with everything, whether it's politics, whether it's football, whether it's parties in the streets, whatever. South America goes hard. And the second thought I had was, this guy's going to get assassinated. There is no way in the world that if this guy is going to make the changes that he looks like he might be able to make, there's already a CIA plot against him. There's already it wouldn't be difficult to put a lone gunman inside this stadium.
Okay, so I don't think he will, but my thought and slight worry is the chance of him being corrupted once he's in power. Because I'm going to use Africa, for example. A lot of African countries, because they're so, like, their governments are so corrupt and like blatantly corrupt, where it's like, it's the picture of, here's a bag of money and, oh, thank you. It's not sly corruption like we have here. And every time there's an election in an African country and someone gets elected, they run on the platform that we're against corruption and we're going to actually fix this country. They get elected and all of a sudden they are corrupted because they're in power and they have the ability to do these things now. What do you think the chances are of Javier Milei being corrupted if he gets into power?
I think zero. I think there is not a chance in the world. Good. And the reason is because corruption is it's very easy to rail against corruption, and then when you are in power, destroy that part of corruption and just allow a different part of corruption. That's how governments work, essentially. That's how different, one party is in power in government and they're corrupt in one way, and the other one points out that corruption and then gets into power and is corrupt in their way, which and favors their groups and their special interest and the corporations that'll prop them up, and the lobbyists that will give them money, and it's just a cycle of who is corrupt. And there's there's a lot of entities that are the most powerful, which are the ones who are, both sides allow them to be corrupt when they're in government. Now, not only is Javier Milei a libertarian, he's an anarcho-capitalist, which is like the perfect libertarian as far as I'm concerned, which means that unless he is flat out lying, and this is where I'm making a judgment call, I don't think he is, then there is no way. He is far too aware of what government is, of where the incentives are, of what is wrong, the things he's saying about what is wrong and what needs to be changed and what needs to be fixed. He cannot become corrupted if he is so aware of these things, unless he is literally lying and is making a conscious decision to use this tactic. But even then,
to go back to your other point, sorry, is the fact that it's South America. So if he was flat out lying, that chance of assassination probably gets a bit higher.
Yeah, well, I mean, yes, and yeah, he's taken a lot of people on for a ride. But even the things he's suggesting, that's the other thing, to win favor by attacking corruption. There are far easier ways to get elected in South America than a strict libertarian, sound economy, anti-central bank way. Like, he's gone, it's a surprise that he's won, because he has gone a really unconventional message, which is the correct message, which is the right message, which is that both sides are fucking you. It's the central banks and their collaboration with government that is slowly ripping every single person off. And that's the reason that Argentina is dying. That's a hard message to sell. So if he was just attracted to power and looking for the easiest way to get in there, then there's way easier messages. And all the time, there's a random that pops up somewhere in South America and wins the election because they've got some new message. That happens in Italy all the time. Like, most of the time, it's a new party that just popped up and manages to coalesce with a few other parties. He has gone the most difficult route, which means that I don't think he's lying. And if he's not lying, then his message is not one that can be corrupted. That's again, I am speculating. And again, our 3.5 viewers are going to be very impressed when he turns out to be the savior of Argentina.
Yeah, I agree. Hey, Argentina part of the Commonwealth? I'm actually not certain.
I don't believe so, but I
okay.
have no idea.
His first move is he takes on the Commonwealth Games.
Let him take it anyway. That'd be sick. Well, yeah. That was that was some messaging that John Ruddick, who we spoke to a little while ago, suggested that the Commonwealth Games be taken on by a private company rather than the government.
Yeah.
Anyway, we're digressing. So that's my thoughts on Javier Milei. Any more thoughts on Javier?
No, only really seen him from the outside. I'd be interested to really like dive deep into his policies. And exactly, obviously we know what he's running on, but just to see how he plans on tackling these issues. But yeah, so far so good. La Libertad Avanza.
La Libertad Avanza. Yeah, it's so annoying that everything is in Spanish.
Yeah, so that's the party name of Javier Milei, and it translates to Liberty Advances.
Yeah. But like you can't just chuck on one of his speeches on a podcast and just listen to it, because I need subtitles to know what he's saying.
Even Instagram struggles to translate half of his messages. I think because it's all in capitals and he's like shouting and he uses a lot of slang. So quite often when he posts, one of the things that does actually translate is, I can't remember exactly what it is in Spanish, but it translates to "Long live liberty, damn." And you're just like, fuck yeah, this guy's just, he cares.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of like he says a lot of like leftist sons of bitches, like fillo de putas, which I do know in Spanish.
Well, there's a theory that people who swear more often are generally more honest. So
you're very honest then, Max. You're one of the most honest people I know. No, well, and
fuck
maybe
yeah,
that's fuck yeah, I am. Maybe that's part of the appeal, because I know he also has appealed a lot to young people. And I mean, these people are poor and getting poorer, and everyone's lying to them and everyone's ripping them off. And like they're promising, that government after government promises these messages filled with hope, and then the government gets rich at their expense and they get poorer.
Argentina are just on track to become the next Venezuela.
Exactly. So like you can see why a messaging platform of literally, these guys are scumbag pieces of shit, they are the devil, and you need to cast them out, and I want to I hate them more than you hate them. You can see why that messaging is working. The question is that translatable to success in the West, where overall the trickle of government theft from people in various ways is slower and more normalized, and people aren't maybe so conscious of the fact that everyone's lying to them and are willing to respond to such a controversial message.
Well, I think this is a great example. This is a great example of why it is important to cut socialism off, like at the neck. And if Javier Milei can win the election and stop it and reverse a lot of the wrongdoings, it stops you from becoming like a communist nation like Venezuela. Because once you go past socialism into communism, it is so hard to turn back. I'm sure in like Venezuela, there are a shitload of people fighting like Javier Milei, probably just as hard to try and get elected and fix that country. But once communism is there and once you have a dictatorship, good luck. So this is why it's so important to stop it and win an election just before it kicks in fully.
Yeah, I mean, if there's any lessons that we've learned from the 20th century, it's that it's horrific. Like socialism is horrific. It should be a dirty word. Like the fact that there's a socialist party in
there's a communist
Victoria.
party in Australia too.
Yeah, like, but the Socialist Party gets 1% to 2%. Like Dan Andrews is considered part of the socialist faction of the Labour. Like the fact that these aren't dirty words that like immediately disqualify you from any ounce of consideration, and people should consider you a scum piece of shit, like subhuman. I have no insults left. Like I ran out of insults before I could finish that diatribe. But the fact that they aren't treated in this way shows that the understanding of the historical context and consequences of socialism is lost on most people, because it should not even be part of the conversation. Like it should be immediately disqualifying.
I remember like probably like mid to late 2020, I put up a Facebook post just ranting about, you know, like lockdowns and the effects and everything it was having. And one of the things I said was that, like, and this isn't even like a contentious thing to say, I said socialism is like the baby steps towards communism. And the amount of people that fired back at me, like saying, that's stupid, that would never happen here. But it's like, I'm not the biggest history buff in the world. I know a lot of libertarians are. I'm not. But it doesn't take a genius or a huge history buff to know that socialism is the baby steps to communism. Fuck, not even baby steps, it's the teenager steps.
Yeah, it's like their explicit mandate is to be a middle ground between like democracy and communism. Anyway, yeah, no, you were right. And those friends of yours are really, really stupid, but I'm sure you already knew that. Speaking of stupid, what a great way to our next and final segue. Now, again, this clip is a little bit older, but I wanted to talk about the man, and it's a couple of months old, and we hadn't talked about the man in a while, and I just think he is so entertaining, and he's got a poem he's going to read for us. So I'm going to share you a poem from a good friend of ours.
Richard Blanco returned to a poem he wrote from the second inaugural Barack and me. A poem, one today. It says, and always one moon like a silent drum tapping at every rooftop and every window on every of every country. Let me start this over again. I'm getting so intimidated by being here. And always one moon like a silent drum tapping on every rooftop and every window of one county. All of us facing the stars. Hope, a new constellation waiting for us to map it, waiting for us to name it together.
You know what that sounded like to me? Have you ever done an experiment on your phone where you type one word and then you just keep hitting predictive text and it like forms a paragraph and it just like, it starts making sense and it just drifts and drifts and starts repeating itself? That's exactly what that sounded like.
Except for the fact that the text actually does make sense. It's just that Biden has an innate, incredible ability, which he hasn't always had, but in recent years he has developed a real skill for this, is to make what he's saying sound incoherent. Before we even, but like without even talking about the fact that he got county and country mixed up so many times that I still don't know whether it's meant to say county or country. Like even just the way he's clearly reading off a teleprompter, even the way he's like squinting and kind of trying to pull his focus, and his reading is horrific. Like if the kids I'm teaching at school in year 7, 8, and 10 were reading like that to me, I would, I'd take them to like a support teacher and say, hey, this kid can't read. Like there's a problem here. Like he can't see them. He can't sound out the words. He's clearly in a state of incredible cognitive decline. He's a decrepit old man. This segment in my notes is called Biden's retarded. And it might sound at first like I'm being politically incorrect by calling him retarded. Retarded means slow. Like there is no better word to describe everything about him at this point. And this is a few months ago, so you can imagine he's probably sharpened up since then. He's actually probably gotten on a much better state since then.
I've got to say, credit to Joe Biden. That's probably one of the first times he's actually addressed that he stuffed something up and he said, oh, I'm sorry, I'm a bit intimidated. Because normally he doesn't even realize and he just keeps going and then stands there looking lost for about 5 minutes till someone like ushers him away.
He's weird because sometimes he seems to still be there. Like he'll have a turn of phrase. Like that, for example, he said, oh, sorry, you guys are intimidating me. And it like the people laughed. And it's kind of funny. It's like, somewhere deep in there's a spark of life. But then there's other times where it's like he just, I don't know, it just something takes over his face. Somewhere in there is the remainder of a brain.
Do you think there's multiple Joe Bidens? Have you seen the bunch of photos where his earlobes are different in every photo? Some days they're attached to his head and other days they're like completely detached.
No, I have not, but that sounds as far as conspiracy theories go, I've heard. Well, see, my problem with that conspiracy theory, if there are multiple Bidens, why have they made them all retarded? Why not make 2 or 3 good ones and then only wheel out the really bad Biden when like there's someone who's inspecting him or something? Like he, you know, like why would you make them all so horrifically bad?
That's a good point. That's a great point.
Yeah. Sorry, conspiracy theory busters over here.
Damn it.
Sorry to.
That's it. We're rebranding collectivitis to conspiracy theory debunkers.
Conspiracy vitus, dissecting the disease that are your conspiracy theories. The point that I wanted to make though with Biden is that sometimes we forget, like Biden is like we've almost become accustomed to him that we forget how absurd, how totally unequivocally absurd the idea is that he is the leader of the free world. Like clearly this man is not capable of making the moves, the strategic decisions. Like at the moment, there's clearly been a strategic push to have Trump indicted and accused of a whole bunch of crimes right under the election. And these are all crimes that he supposedly committed way back in 2020 and before. But all the indictments and all the court hearings are coming in now. Now, this is clearly because of the fact that he is the front runner of the Republicans, and clearly it's meant to derail his ability to campaign under the election. Like that is so obviously what's happening here. And it's a great idea. Like as far as the strategy goes, it's dirty. It's a filthy strategy. And it reeks of Banana Republic, where you literally go after your political enemies by using the law to imprison them. But it's a great strategy.
Do you think it's working though? Because it's also generating a lot of like support for Trump as well. There are a lot of people saying, well, fuck these guys, and they're fully throwing the support behind Trump.
And that's the question, is whether it's certainly making him more popular in the Republican primaries, because Republican voters are sick of the left and they see, oh, okay, well, if they're going after this guy, this is clearly the guy that is my guy, you know, regardless of what they thought of him. Otherwise, they're like, okay, they're attacking him.
That could be a good strategy then. Like help him win the Republican primary, knowing that like the rest of the people are gonna hate him for all his indictments.
Well, that's what I mean. They're trying to, whether they make him popular in the Republican primary matters little to them. They want to make him unelectable in the face of the rest of the population that's still plugged into the mainstream media. But regardless, my point was that this strategy is regardless of how you feel about it and how it's immoral and whatever, it's a genius strategy. There's no way in the world that Joe Biden came up with this strategy, has any input in the strategy, has any, like, that man can barely speak 2.5 words. Like, if he gets through an interview or a speech and doesn't make a fool of himself, that's the exception. Like, he's a walk. They're hiding him. They're trying to keep him away. And this is supposed to be the leader of the free world. Okay. If he is not in charge, which he clearly isn't, if the president is not the one making the decisions, then already, like, even to the most blue-pilled, believe in the system, trust the government, people that voters, you know, members of the public that there could possibly be, someone unelected, someone behind the curtain, someone other than the person who everyone is saying is the president is the president.
Well, on that note, Kamala Harris has been very quiet lately. Have not heard from her in quite a while.
Yeah, as much as I don't think Biden's making the decisions, I definitely don't think Kamala Harris is making the decisions. Kamala Harris is like, if you're the Democrats right now and you're thinking, shit, Biden's no good, maybe we have to take Biden down, or maybe he's going to go down by himself. That's your first thought. Your second thought is, dear God, please don't let it be Kamala Harris. Have you heard her speaking? Like, we could have done a video of her gaffes today. Like, she talks like her brain shuts down in front of the pressure every time, and she just repeats 3.5 sentences of asinine kindergarten level comments.
I think it's because she knows she's wrong. It's not like Biden doesn't know where he is. She knows she's wrong and gets called out, and then just sort of is a bit like, ooh.
I think I can't tell you what she should not be in cognitive decline. She is, by all accounts, like she was a successful lawyer. The fact that she can't string sentences together in a way that doesn't sound like she's talking to kindergartners is weird. I will say that it's weird. But anyway, my point is that the more idiotic Biden is, the more we need to remember that this is supposed to be the leader of the free world. And we need to be completely conscious of the fact that if it's not, and I don't think you can talk to even like lefties here and say, hey, what do you think of Biden? They'd be like, oh, yeah, he's disabled. He's a poor old man who's decrepit. And if anyone's willing to admit that, then the lie that the government is pretending to be a democratically elected entity is just around the corner. It's right there. Like you just have to follow that logical conclusion without getting distracted or without, if you think it's funny that Joe Biden can't string two words together, then you also should acknowledge the fact that the government is illegitimate. Like that he is supposed to be the leader and he is not, which means that someone is making decisions who was not elected. That should make your skin crawl if you're like to us, we're already pretty used to this idea that unelected people are making decisions that are robbing all of us. But if you're a normie, if you're someone who believes in everything the government says, it should make your skin crawl to think that some unelected shadowy figure behind a curtain, whether it be someone within the Democratic Party or someone within the deep state or whatever, is making decisions such as let's push Russia on the brink of nuclear war with Ukraine and therefore with all of NATO and therefore with us. Like that should make your skin crawl.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, there are more people waking up than what we believe. I reckon I actually saw something today from Kelly Slater, who is a very successful surfer. I'm sure most of our viewers have probably heard of him before. And yeah, he's actively speaking out. He has for the last few years against the COVID regime and everything. But even today, he was having a full-on crack against the government and their involvement in Ukraine and Russia. So maybe the tide's turning, Pietro.
So the moral of this episode is every time you see a video of Joe Biden doing something really, really disabled, laugh, share it, and point out to your friends, gee, that guy is
retarded.
Pretty retarded. Surely he's not the one making the decisions. If he's not the one making the decisions, who is?
Maybe the penny will drop.
Maybe that's what'll make the penny drop. Anyway, I think we've covered heaps today. Was there anything else you wanted to mention quickly before we finished on any of those things that we've talked about?
No, not really. Yeah.
Cool. I think we've done
good chat.
We've done well.
Good chat. We've got a couple of bumper guests coming up in the next few weeks, don't we?
We do. So stay tuned. We've got a couple of really interesting kind of outsider, a little bit outside the libertarian movement guests coming up. So I won't spoil them just in case they get cancelled or something horrific happens at the last minute and we can't get them. They're not retarded, which is nice. Yeah. Unlike the rest of our guests.
That's not what I was implying.
No, of course not. No, they're good. So yeah, stay tuned. If you don't already, follow us on Instagram, like us on Spotify, subscribe to us on YouTube, do the thing to us on Twitter/X or Twitter X or whatever it's called. And we will catch you next time.
That's better.